Hi, guys. I want to discuss Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory in Chapter 7 and how it relates to video game violence. And during the time that this theory was developed, you had these communication theorists starting to pay attention to the correlation of the real world violence and the rise in TVs. And so the media content would create these pictures in viewers' heads of these scenarios and the subsequent sequence of events that followed those scenarios, in which those people later remember and use that memory to guide their behavior. And that's also known as vicarious learning. And Bandura believed that knowledge acquisition was directly related to observing others. And so his theory has four components. The first one is attention. So a person has to have a long enough attention span to be able to observe the modeling. The second is memory, a person's ability to remember, and this happens through rehearsal, retention, and priming. The third one is imitation, and it's just the person's ability to imitate the behavior, whether it be physically and mentally prepared. And then the last one is motivation. Is there reinforcement and punishment expectations that encourage them to be motivated to act out that behavior? And so for social cognitive theory to take place, a person must have a mental representation of the behavior and have an expectation of the outcome of that behavior. And so Bandura did an experiment with some nursery school children. You can find this experiment on pages 189 and 190 in our book. And he showed a TV program in which the character was rewarded for aggressive behavior and then also punished for the aggressive behavior. And those students who saw that he was rewarded, they displayed that in real life. And those who saw that he was punished did not. And so Bandura offered an incentive if the children could display the behavior, those who didn't at first. And to his finding, they did adjust their behavior, and they showed those aggressive behaviors based on the incentive, and so, which is social prompting. And they rearranged their behavioral hierarchy to behave because the expectation of reward was greater than punishment. And it also proved that media content did affect a person's inhibitions against aggression. And so we can apply the social cognitive theory to video game usage because video game players are much more involved in on-screen activity than just media viewers. And even though violent movies and violent video games aren't outright saying that it's okay to behave that way, they're displaying and giving examples of behavior that you could on how to act in a stressful situation. And so the explosion of realistic interactive video games are very captivating, and it grabs the attention. They play it over and over and over again, and it builds their memory. And if a person has a biological or psychological predisposition to be aggressive, then they're more likely to imitate and be motivated to exhibit those behaviors in the real world. And so adolescents, during the time of their development, their brain is undergoing changes to where their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and that's responsible for their reasoning. Their amygdala is in full charge. And that's a primitive part of your brain, which is responsible for survival and fight or flight. And then they have these hormones all over the place. Their social and emotional region of the brain, which is the limbic system, is not fully developed. And it explains why social rejection and social acceptance are powerful. They powerfully impact teenagers and why they say and do impulsive things. And so, in other words, teenagers, they have the perfect brain set up for social cognitive theory to take place and result in aggressive behaviors based on violent video games. And so many video games, they're designed to offer identification. And so remember, teenagers are seeking that during this stage. And they identify with characters, and it increases their psychological and emotional interactivity. And also on page 197 in our book, Konigshin and Bijvac and Bushman's research showed that wishful identification with violent characters in realistic games produced greater levels of aggression in players. And so in an example, an aggressive, impulsive teenager with imbalanced hormones, they can justify acting out aggressive behavioral scripts if they find themselves feeling desperate enough in a new conflicting situation. And so I'm convinced that there's a causal link between mediated violence through violent video games and subsequent aggression. Although it's not 100% certainty that a person will behave aggressive just because they're playing, they're still learning those behaviors. And it would ultimately depend on a combination of a person's biological and psychological state, their past experiences, and their outcome expectancies for them to act violently in situations that cause significant desperation in real life.